Danjiha. So now let's talk about the difference between the tropical and the sidereal zodiac. Which one should you use? If you understand the basic principles of the zodiac and why the signs are the way they are in terms of their ruler, element, and modality, then it will be easy for you to choose the right zodiac. We have already learned why the zodiac has 12 divisions, right? And not some other number, and why they're all 30 degrees equal. We learned that the sun's movement is the basis for the zodiac. The sun's movement over the course of the day, which is the rising and setting of the sun, relative to the horizon, is mirrored over the course of a year as the sun rises and sets over the Earth's horizon or the equator. The local horizon and the sun's movement over that sets up the houses, and the Earth's equator and the sun's movement relative to that sets up the zodiac signs. So we have the Earth-Sun cycle that acts as the anchor for the zodiac signs. The foundation of the zodiac signs is the sun's movement around the Earth. The sun's movement relative to our local horizon creates the houses, and relative to the equator creates the zodiac signs. So it's the sun's movement around the Earth that anchors the zodiac to the 4 cardinal points. Of course, that also includes the movement of the moon, right? Part of the sun's movement is the movement of the moon that goes on side by side, right? There are 12 lunar cycles, or 12 months within one solar cycle or a year, and that's ultimately why there are the 12 divisions in the zodiac. So now what happens if the zodiac is sidereal? What kind of zodiac will we get? Well, it's definitely gonna be a different one than the tropical zodiac. We'll still have this beautiful pattern of the sun and moon forming the 12 symmetrical divisions, but we don't have the solstices and equinoxes acting as the anchor points for these motions, right? Instead, we're going to have a star play that role. All right, that's why it's called sidereal, which means based on a star. The sidereal zodiac is a star-based zodiac. In other words, siderealists, they keep the lunar solar rhythm but remove the cardinal points, right? Because they anchor the zodiac to a star. So that might sound okay, but the problem is out of the hundreds of prominently visible stars in the sky, there's not one in the place of 0 degrees of Aries, right? Of course, they just pick another star, and mostly siderealists agree to use the star Spica to mark the middle of their zodiac, which is 0 degrees of Libra. And we might think that this is like a good solution, but the problem is with this idea that it throws off the foundation of the zodiac. And we'll get into this more very soon. I would just like to talk about one thing before that. There's another group that we could call the constellationists, and they believe that the constellations themselves are the zodiac. So they not only do away with the 4 cardinal points of the equinoxes and solstices, but they also remove the entire lunar solar rhythm that creates the 12-fold divisions of the zodiac, right? So they take the actual borders of the constellations to define the signs of the zodiac. And then you get something that looks like this. So we have Aries, that's 25 degrees, Taurus 37, Gemini 31, Cancer 20, and so forth. And actually, since we're talking about constellations, then we also should not forget that there's actually a 13th constellation. And so the zodiac would actually look something like this. So now coming back to the siderealists, for them it actually would be the best for their astrological practice if they only use nakshatras, because they correctly anchor the nakshatras to a star, right? Which is the way that it should be done. And therefore, they can make very accurate predictions with nakshatras. And it is no surprise that usually Vedic astrologers will focus on nakshatras and also planets. And they also use Vimshottari Dasha, which is calculated with the help of the moon nakshatra, right? But Vedic astrologers, they usually don't like to use Rashis in general, and they will also avoid Jaimini, right? Because Jaimini is a system that's based on Rashis, right? Jaimini actually has 12 dashas that work really well, but only if you use tropical Rashis, right? When you use Sidereal Rashis, then a Jaimini just won't work, okay? It won't give good results. And so what they are trying, what they're actually trying to do is, with Jaimini, they actually ignore all the dashas that are there, and they just made up their own Rashi Dasha, which they usually call Chara Dasha, right? And they also sort of use it like Vimshottari Dasha to predict everything with. It's a Dasha for everything, but it's not very useful. So the idea is that since since those who follow the sidereal theory, they anchor the nakshatras to a star, they can use the nakshatras really well. But they also anchor the zodiac to a star. And because of that, they shift the zodiac signs out of the anchor points of the equinoxes and solstices, and then the zodiac becomes a mess. So now if we take the sidereal theory, which is to anchor the zodiac to a star instead of the cardinal points, then what happens to the cardinal points? Well, the cardinal points will slowly drift backwards through the signs. And that's really like trying to turn a house that is built on 4 pillars, right? You keep the 4 pillars and just want to turn the house on top of the pillars, right? Of course, we can't do that because the house is going to collapse, right? And so the problem is really that people are trying to fuse nakshatras to zodiac signs. And then what is happening is they're shifting the whole thing out of the anchor points, okay? And this is a mistake because the nakshatras and the rashis, they form 2 separate planes that exist side by side. And their correlation slowly changes. Zodiac signs are based on the solstices and equinoxes, and the star constellations are based on a star, right? And there are 2 different planes that actually shift by 1 degree every 72 years and only line up exactly every 26,000 years. And when that exact lineup happened last time, which was around 1600 years ago, the astrologers in India decided to continue using the sidereal signs, right? The sidereal zodiac. They permanently fix the stars to the signs and they measure the precession of the equinoxes through an ayanamsha. And Western astrologers instead decided to use the tropical zodiac and keep it fixed to the 4 cardinal points. Now, the majority of Vedic astrologers are sidereal astrologers. However, there has always been astrologers historically in India that use tropical rashis with sidereal nakshatras. Gradually, since the last century, 20th century, more and more people who study Vedic astrology decide to use the tropical zodiac with sidereal nakshatras, right? Firstly, of course, because there's no logical, sound explanation for using sidereal rashis, and secondly, because they get, greater accuracy in their astrological practice. Okay. To continue with our analogy, for them it's like leaving the house on the pillars, but maybe just moving stuff around in the house from time to time. Not that we move our stuff in the house and along with it we have to move the entire structure of the house too. Okay. And sometimes, they say that both zodiacs are correct and each one, has their merits and their usefulness. I'm not sure if both of those ways of living in a house are equally recommended. We just can't remove the foundation, from a house, or remove the anchor points from the zodiac. If we take the sidereal theory and anchor the zodiac to a star, then the cardinal points will slowly drift backwards through the signs. And if we do this, we lose the anchor points that are necessary to determine what planets rule what signs. Right? Leo and Cancer won't be the northernmost signs anymore because the cardinal points shift. Right? And so we lose the rationale behind why the Sun and Moon would choose Leo and Cancer. And if we allow the cardinal points to drift through the signs and not affix the signs to the cardinal points, then the elements and modalities of the signs change too, right? As the cardinal points shift backwards, those elements and modalities, they shift through the signs. And the cardinal points actually already shifted back by 23 degrees over the past 1600 years. So this means that for those who actually follow and believe in this sidereal theory, that the ascending equinox moved backwards by 23 degrees. And Pisces has become more and more a cardinal fire sign that is ruled by Mars. So the assignment of the ruling planet, the element, and the modality of the signs are all inherently tropical. And if we remove the anchor points of the cardinal directions, we really mess up the zodiac. And as a result, we have to do all this patchwork, invent all sorts of new techniques to deal with all the problems and errors that come up inevitably. We have already talked about the beautiful symmetry of planetary rulership, modality, and element that forms the core structure of the zodiac. So what happens if we include Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto and allow them to rule signs in the zodiac? Well, Jupiter has to leave Pisces, right? Or at least he has to move over and make room for Neptune, who now owns or co-owns Pisces. Saturn has to get out of Aquarius, and he has to, make room for Uranus, who is now also owning or co-owning Aquarius. And Mars also needs to get out to make room for Pluto. Let's also not forget about the Vedic idea that people have, that they want to give sign ownership to the north and south nodes of the moon, right? And so now let's also put Rahu in Aquarius and Ketu in Scorpio. Let's remember that every planet owns a male and a female sign, right? And that creates such a beautiful balance in the zodiac. But if we add the modern sign rulers, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, then we need to say goodbye to that balance in the zodiac, okay? The whole half of the zodiac actually becomes imbalanced. Apart from that, in Vedic astrology, there's also a concept of natural friendship that has a huge impact on the dignity of a planet, for example. Right? Natural friendship is based on the idea that planets rule signs that are favorable and unfavorable for a planet as counted from its Mula Trikona sign. And when we change the planets that rule the signs, then the natural friendships of the planets, they also change. So, to conclude, we can see that much of the confusion about the zodiac can actually be easily dispelled simply by knowing some basic concepts of astrology. And then when we use the zodiac the way it is intended to be used, then we see that we will get much better results.